Okay, I'm going to get started. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to once again remind people that the Q&A tab at the bottom can help ask questions as you think of them, and we'll engage Amanda in some conversation at the end after she's done her presentation. Amanda is the Polluter Accounting Program Manager with Clean Water for North Carolina, and Amanda's roots are firmly set in the Appalachian Mountains through her heritage and her love of the land and the people. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Geographic Science and Environmental Studies from James Madison University in 2008, and a Master of Science degree in Sustainability Studies right here at Lenoir-Rhyne University in Asheville in 2018. And she was a Reese Fellow and a wonderful one, and we miss her dearly, but we know she's out doing wonderful work in her job. And in her job as Polluter Accountability Program Manager, she works with communities facing impacts from coal ash, factory farming, and environmental justice issues. She currently resides in Fairview, North Carolina, where she and her partner raise backyard chickens and tend their garden. And I'm going to turn things over to you, Amanda. We're so glad to have you and look forward so much to your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here and appreciate you having me. So yes, I'm Amanda Schroderman. I'm with Clean Water from North Carolina, and I'm just going to be talking a little bit about industrial poultry operations and water quality in North Carolina. So just briefly, this is what I'll cover today, just a brief intro to Clean Water for North Carolina, some perceptions about farms, the growth of poultry industry in North Carolina, some regulations or lack thereof, impacts from poultry waste, and other issues with the current system, as well as a strategy for a better system. So Clean Water for North Carolina is a statewide organization, nonprofit that works with communities experiencing issues with air and drinking water quality, as well as water affordability issues. We have a particular focus on environmental justice through our polluter accountability and water justice programs. We've got offices in Asheville and Durham, as well as an Eastern organizer. And as Keith said, I am the Polluter Accountability Program and Office Manager in Asheville. And together with our environmental justice organizer and researcher, Shelby Klein, the Asheville office has been working on the issue of impacts from poultry operations. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of an icebreaker about perceptions about farms and animal growers. So what I'd like for you to do is just take a look at the next 3 sets of pictures and consider which one you think is the family farm. So here's the first set. And the second set of photos. And this is the last one. Okay, so just think about which ones you think are family farms. Well, the answer is all of the above, or at least they could be. Family farm is a classification of the USDA, and it can include very small to very large farms that can be organized as a family corporation. So the purpose of this exercise was simply to say that there are different perceptions about farms and animal growers. And we're certainly in no way against family farms or farm workers. What we do take a look at are the systems and whether or not that system is just for both communities and for workers. So what we will be talking about today are CAFOs. These are concentrated or confined animal feeding operations. These 2 photos I took myself during a flyover and a visit to Cleveland County, North Carolina earlier this year. This is a newly built 16-barn poultry operation that many community members gathered to actually try and oppose at a town council meeting. Chicken barns can sometimes hold 30,000 birds, and I believe this one is a turkey operation and is estimated to produce 35,000 tons of manure per year. So that was only one of many of the operations that have been built in the last decade or so. This map, produced by the Environmental Working Group and Waterkeeper Alliance, shows the growth of the poultry industry since 2008. This was part of their report called Under the Radar. And as you can see from the orange dots, there has been a lot of growth. So each dot represents an operation, not a barn. And some of these are being called mega operations, having 20 or more barns. You can also see from the graph that the general trend and the number of poultry operations is rising rapidly. This data is from 2018, and I'm told by folks at Environmental Working Group that the new map shows a few hundred more. A big issue that was highlighted in this report is that our Department of Environmental Quality does not have information on the location of these operations or even how many are in the state. So this was a bit of a shock to me, and I just wondered, how could this be? Well, apparently it's because dry litter poultry operations are deemed permitted. They don't have to apply for permits in the way that wet waste operations do. And dry waste poultry operators have no obligation to notify the public about a new operation. They have much fewer waste management obligations, and Department of Environmental Quality will only have a record of their location if a complaint is filed about a potential violation. So if you live in an area zoned for agriculture, a poultry operation could become your new neighbor. So how do we know if a poultry operation is in violation? Well, it turns out that there are a few rules that they do have to follow. They have to maintain waste management records, not store waste within 100 feet of a body of water or a well, not leave waste stockpiled uncovered for more than 15 days at a time, and not apply waste to fields or crops during a precipitation event or on flooded land. But violations are actually pretty difficult to prove. This is another photo I took during my flyover of Cleveland County this year with the nonprofit organization South Wings and David Caldwell, the Broad River Keeper. We captured one moment in time here where waste piles can be seen uncovered and exposed to the elements. David said that this was not the first time. In fact, I'm not sure that he'd ever seen these particular piles covered. However, we would have to do a flyover of this site every day for 15 consecutive days to prove that this was a violation. And even if we could prove that this and many, many other sites don't cover their waste piles, the Department of Environmental Quality wouldn't have the staff to be able to enforce it. So what motivation do these growers have to deal responsibly with the waste they produce? Unfortunately, I can't even say that the stockpiles are the biggest issue with poultry waste. A much bigger issue occurs when the waste is spread on fields and crops improperly. So dry litter poultry waste can be used as an effective fertilizer for crops. I actually raise a few backyard chickens and I mix the litter with compost for my garden. The problems begin when the poultry waste is over-applied and it begins to run off into nearby bodies of water. Contaminants from the poultry litter can include excess nutrients, pathogens, antibiotics, growth hormones, heavy metals, and pesticide. Over-application can lead to impaired waters and public health and safety concerns. Bacteria in the water can cause intestinal issues and infections. And because of the antibiotics the poultry receives, these can be stronger strains of bacteria. Algal blooms, aside from killing fish, can cause rashes, stomach issues, respiratory problems, If you like to kayak or swim or fish, can have a serious impact on your recreation time. But nitrates can infiltrate well water, especially in areas with more sandy soil, and have been linked to an awful condition known as blue baby syndrome, as well as colon and thyroid issues. So not only is overapplication of poultry waste an environmental concern, it is a public health concern. Very little research exists to study the full impacts to drinking water, and that is definitely something that needs attention. There are also some issues with air quality in and around poultry operations that are a health concern, both for workers and neighbors. Ammonia, known for being a pungent respiratory irritant, can also be redeposited back onto the surface as nitrates and lead to further nitrate pollution in water. Many who live near poultry operations can attest to the huge fans that constantly blow dust laden with waste around their property. In addition to the smell, which can be unbearable, living near a poultry operation can actually increase the risk of community-acquired pneumonia, perhaps making poultry neighbors more vulnerable to respiratory illnesses like COVID. Houseflies and vermin and the diseases associated with them have also been shown to increase near some poultry operations. So between the odor and the flies, poultry neighbors may find it difficult to spend any time outdoors on their own land. And if they decide to move, they may also find that their property values have dropped, making it difficult to leave a bad situation. So where does all the waste go? Well, we know that some of the waste does get applied to crops and fields. There are a few records from third-party waste haulers that are public record, but these records are pretty vague about where the waste is actually being spread. It might say, oh, somewhere on Jones Road. There's no way to pinpoint exactly where the spread is happening because coordinates aren't recorded on the records. So since we don't have good records, we wanted to know basically whether or not the waste generated in a county could be responsibly spread. And we looked at Cleveland County first, where Clean Water has a history of community outreach and coal ash issues. And we started by making the most conservative assumptions possible. We looked at all available cropland and assumed that it would be spread evenly, which is not likely the case. We had to assume that the soil was completely devoid of nutrients, which is also not true. And we did not consider other forms of fertilizer, such as commercial sales or from other types of manure. So then we took a look at agronomic rates for crops grown in North Carolina to see how the nutrients could be taken up. And we picked the crop, turns out to be sweet potatoes, that requires the most phosphorus. Most of the crops and fields in Cleveland County would require far less nutrients, but with all these conservative assumptions, we still found that Cleveland County produces nearly twice the amount of poultry waste that could possibly be spread responsibly. So let's take a regional look. We use the same calculations and assumptions for the other counties in the state. And here we see the Western Piedmont region. We see that Alexander County in the center of this map produces over 10 times as much waste as can be spread in the county. Now, it's not to say that all poultry waste must stay within county boundaries, but we know from the waste hauler records that waste is not transported very far, and other counties in the region are also producing waste from their operations. It's important to note that Alexander County actually has the highest waste to cropland ratio in the entire state. Oops. I clicked on a link. Hang on. All right. In addition to the problems with waste and the lax regulations for deemed permitted operations, there are other considerations. Due to right to farm statutes and ag-gag laws, neighbors of poultry operations are very limited in what they can do to speak out for their families and their communities. There's a very limited window to file a nuisance claim, and often the more serious problems don't even begin until the operation has been up and running for a couple of years. Ag-gag laws have prevented whistleblowers from reporting wrongdoing as well, although recently the constitutionality of these laws has been challenged. But the other side of the story is that poultry growers themselves can become trapped in a system that is not fair to them. Because of the vertical integration system, growers have little control. They must follow corporate methods and criteria that can change over time. They're expected to pay for infrastructure, often through loans that they use their farms as collateral. They're not in control of the quality of the chicks or the feed that they receive from the company, which can affect their ability to earn money from their product. And in fact, they must compete sometimes with their neighbors in a tournament system, getting paid based on the quality of the animals that they deliver as compared to other growers. So what this means is that it can be an unreliable income from paycheck to paycheck. And for some growers, this means that they can't keep up with their loans and could lose their farms. The film Under Contract by the Rural Advancement Foundation International details many of the injustices to growers in the current system. And the bigger picture is that the system and its impacts don't end there. Meat processing plants come with their own set of impacts, including other types of water pollution and recent coverage of outbreaks from COVID-19 as workers process meat in close quarters without adequate protective gear. Another consideration are cumulative impacts from poultry operations in communities with hog farms and other sources of pollution. As this report from Environmental Working Group points out, many such communities are low income and communities of color. So the issue of impacts from poultry operations is often an environmental justice issue. So we can't talk about the problems with poultry CAFOs without also addressing some of the possible solutions. At the bottom line is we need better legislation. There was a proposed amendment to the 2019 Farm Act to study dry poultry litter operations, and I think we need to revisit this idea and make sure that we're looking into impacts to air, to surface water, and to groundwater. And we should be requiring the same permitting regulations for all CAFOs, but also strengthen the regulation for storage and application of waste, making sure that operations and to keep operations and waste out of floodplains at a safe distance from schools and residences, and also to consider environmental justice and cumulative impacts. We need to ensure that we have opportunities for community members to speak out. And finally, we can't forget to support our local independent farmers, providing aid for those struggling under oppressive contracts and promoting and supporting direct sales of product to the community. Virginia, for example, has incentive programs for growers for better waste management. Michigan has stronger waste permits for all CAFOs. And many communities have successful farmers markets and community-supported agriculture. I've even signed up for a local meat CSA myself. But the solutions, the problems are undeniable, but the solutions are not impossible. What we need to do is to act. So in conclusion, this certainly is an issue that impacts all of us, as water consumers and recreators and people who care about the environment and community health. But let's not forget that some folks are disproportionately impacted, and we need to act on this issue as a matter of justice and morality. Thanks for listening. And if you work or live near a poultry operation, we would love to hear about your experiences.
Thank you so much. Woohoo! That was great and interesting and disturbing at the same time, and really appreciate raising this issue. And I think your organization, it sounds like you're doing really important investigative work to try and figure out what's going on. And I love that you end with possible solutions and thinking about legislation and community input and thinking about support for the independent farmers to make this work better. I'm wondering for those first two, for legislation, you talked about the farm bill, and you talked about opportunities for community input. So part of this seems like it's an issue of scale, and I'm wondering at what scale is the appropriate level. Is this a state issue? Is this a federal issue, or something else that in the eyes of you and or Clean Water for North Carolina?
Well, we're a state organization. We certainly focus quite a bit on North Carolina laws, but it could be a federal matter. In fact, I believe there's a bill out now, drafted by Cory Booker, supported by a few other senators, that outlines some solutions to this problem. And it includes support for some of these local growers who are trapped in contracts and so forth. So it could be federal, but I think that North Carolina certainly has some leeway to step up and, become a better leader in this. There are some other states that have set some examples that we could certainly follow. And I think the bill, the amendment to the Farm Act was shut down because the poultry industry is such a strong force here in North Carolina, I think. But that would be a really good start, just to, find out actually what are the impacts of these dry litter poultry operations.
That's great. Thank you. Kelly, do you have do you see any questions in the chat or other places, or any coming from you? And if you don't, that's fine. Okay. I'm also curious, Johnny, you're also there. I'm curious, when you zoomed in on Cleveland County and the challenges that are going on there, that was a case study to sort of demonstrate that simply that if we're spreading this manure, there's way too much of it. And how does that compare to other counties? And why did you choose Cleveland County to start? And how might that compare? You don't know, of course, but how might that compare to other counties? Is that a potentially high poultry area, or?
It's definitely growing in poultry operations. We started in Cleveland County because we intended to do community outreach in that county. Our plans kind of changed with the pandemic. And so we focused more on the data that we already had and the research on the issue. But as you can see from this map, the yellow areas are that's the available cropland. The red dots are the poultry operations. And in some cases, you can see in the northern part of the county, there are a concentration of poultry operations and not as much cropland. So, we know from some of the poultry hauling, the waste hauling records that the manure is not getting transferred that far, usually only a few miles, I believe. And so it's just not even feasible, even if it was completely and evenly spread across all of the available cropland for that manure to be used responsibly. there's just no way that the crops that we have there could take up the nutrients that are available in that poultry waste. And what was the other part of your question? Did I miss?
No, I think that's it. I think it was about the extent to which they characterize a similar amount of poultry operations versus others, and how you chose them. You got it all. But I do have another question, and it's actually, I know you said if people wanted more information, contact you and the organization about that. And I'm just wondering what else Clean Water for Carolina has been working on in recent years, and what kind of successes and what kind of challenges are still out there, other issues beyond the poultry farms. I don't want to take attention away from this, but I'm curious where else Clean Water for North Carolina is working.
Sure. Yeah. Well, when I came on a couple of years ago, we had a pretty major focus on coal ash in the ASHFA office. And since then, we helped to do some community organizing. We're a part of the Act Against Coal Ash group for North Carolina. And since then we got, because of community participation, the DEQ decided to order full excavation and cleanup of all of those sites. The Durham office is also working on pipelines and fracking issues. Recently, they got some great news that the Atlantic Coast Pipeline was going to be canceled, and they have the Frack Free Alliance, Frack Free NC, that they've been a part of for many, many years, that helped to get out the word and organize and help make that possible. So, yeah, just a number of water quality issues, and certainly we keep an eye on air quality issues as well, and communities that are particularly impacted, with environmental justice issues.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It looks like someone is suggesting you reach out to Amanda, your nutrient calculations seem incorrect. There's an animal waste specialist at NCSU that studies this issue. Have you reached out to her? Animal waste specialist.
Okay, I will. Yeah,
you can look into that.
Check our calculations.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. And I love that you end by talking about not only water quality, but air quality, and the ways in which your organization is stepping up to address these issues, because that is a nice bridge for us to look forward to our air quality conference that is coming up in December,